The session is being recorded for future viewing enjoyment, which will end up on Civic Tech's YouTube channel. So if you have an issue with that, just talk to any one of the organizers. And for now, I'm going to actually introduce the presenter, Jean-Noé Landry. So Jean-Noé is the Executive Director of Open North, which is Canada's leading open data nonprofit. Open North works with parliaments, governments, media organizations, nonprofits, and supports civic tech initiatives. Open North is a steward of the International Open Data Charter, and which is an anchor of the International Open Data Conference Roadmap, and actively involved in open government partnership. It runs projects designed to engage data users and promotes inter-sectoral collaboration while offering open data leadership training for civil servants and consulting for city managers. It works with the National Energy Board, supports the Immigration Refugee Citizenship Canada, assess the digital capacity of the settlement newcomer sector, and provides technical advice to the Government of Ontario in creating their community hubs strategy. So Jean-Noé is a leading data activist in Canada and an international democracy expert. He recently co-established the Canadian Open Government Civil Society Network to address the civic mobilization and communications gaps with the government and on open government issues. So without any further ado, Jean-Noé.
Great turnout. I'm sure it's not just for me.
Yes, it is.
No. It's very exciting to be here. It's my first time, as I said, to be part of this regular event, and it's quite inspiring to know what's been going on in Toronto. So I just wanted to kind of underline and stress that whenever Open North or different organizations have an opportunity to hear what's going on in Toronto, we're a big country. We need to scale some of the good work that's being done locally across the country. So this is a model for a lot of different pockets of activism and organizing that's taking place around Canada. So congratulations. Part of getting points is just to show up, right? And I think we've accomplished half of that today. So thank you for all the energy that you have to continue this, and I know that there's plans to scale this even further going forward. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Open North. Who has heard of Open North? All right. James, you've heard of Open North. Just want to recognize also James as the founder of Open North. I've been to ED for about a year and a half now and working with the team for about 3 years. And I come in to the conversation about open data as an open data activist. I co-founded Open Montreal and Open Quebec. Around like 2009 or so, and have been involved and very interested in transparency and accountability and the role that technology can play as a civic engagement kind of enabler, right? So right now, we've got 3 main areas of focus: government, a lot of work going on around cities, obviously, and we just published a discussion paper with the Open Data Institute in the UK on city resilience and the value added of open data. Okay, so really kind of looking forward at how can open data be part of resolving and anticipating a lot of risks to cities. So I invite you to read our paper about that. We interviewed about 40 different experts around the world about this. Legislative focus as well. We've done some work with the Parliament, with the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer in Ottawa, developing a tool that enables MPs to cost policies as a predictive analysis tool. It's been quite useful for MPs. We know that it's been used by political parties as a fact-checking also tool, especially in the former administration nationally, right? And obviously there's like some civic benefits to that. If MPs have the ability to be able to fact-check each other, well, citizens should as well, right? So we're now in the process of promoting this tool with think tanks, different types of organizations, etc. And community, this is community here in this room, but there's also different types of stakeholders, and I'll give a couple of examples of the work that we've been doing. We're also a social enterprise, so there's one of our main products, citizenbudget.com, 3 different modules. That's the main work that Cameron is doing as part of our team. From a fulfillment perspective, we've sold it to 75 different cities across North America, and scaling and doing some work in France and elsewhere. Our approach, this is really kind of something that's been developing over the last kind of 2 years or so. So how to globalize what's going on locally and how to localize what's happening globally. Okay, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the International Open Data Conference and also with the Open Government Partnership. Ontario, as you may know, is part of the OGP, right? It's part of its subnational initiative. So this is very relevant here in Toronto. But more broadly, it's something that is really gaining a lot of traction internationally. So I want to kind of explain to you the relevance, why it matters. We kind of challenge you to think also about why you should care about the OGP. And then a bunch of acronyms at the bottom of the page. I've already mentioned the OGP, IODC, CODS. Who knows what CODS stand for? Over here? Besides the fish, yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay. So the Canadian Open Data Summit, right? It's a regular event. It's really kind of the main national kind of convening opportunity for the open data community to meet on a regular basis. We're going into our 5th year. It's going to take place in Edmonton. Check it out. It's really where we're trying to identify some of the big challenges for the open data community. All right, so let's move ahead. All right, so what's coming up at Open North? We've mentioned a couple of times in the intro, a couple of projects that are coming up. We haven't really communicated much about the work that's going to be underway when we start off this year. But I wanted to, as I kind of titled the slide here, what's coming up, or how can an organization dedicated to open data sustain itself, right? Because it's not easy. We have a lot of different organizations that are focused on different issue areas or very kind of particular kind of niche markets, but we managed to sustain ourselves doing open data and really having to focus strictly on open data in everything that we do. So we mentioned a national energy board. Probably heard the news this morning, right, coming from south of the border with pipelines and these types of decisions. Well, this is an opportunity for Open North, and we've just started this work with the National Energy Board to identify what is the data needs of different stakeholders in Canada. So how do we use data as a way to have a conversation with different types of stakeholders who want to know more about the data that the National Energy Board either collects or analyzes, or a bunch of different things that it does with data. So we're talking about the demand from energy, pipelines. There's a range of different data sets. So we can probably all agree that more of that data should be open. But then what can we do with it, right? This is what you guys are doing through different civic tech projects. So how do we engage? And government sometimes is not the best at engaging with different stakeholders. So we have a role as intermediaries to facilitate that conversation in a structured way. Publish What You Pay Canada. If you don't know about Publish What You Pay, I encourage you to look them up. We're just doing right now finalizing a project to map out different payments from the extractive sector, so for different companies that are involved in the extractive sector, to different governments in Canada, and also different communities, just like First Nations. So often there's payments that go locally, so we're mapping this out, right, to be able to add transparency and visually represent what's happening. Very excited about the next project, working with First Nations and Aboriginal communities, with a mandate to develop a interest paper, so not a concept paper, but really an interest paper on data sovereignty. So First Nations, Aboriginal communities, they're not stakeholders. We're really dealing from a sovereign to sovereign basis relationship. So this is where we have an opportunity to align, open government goals and, objectives of the government with the reconciliation process. So how do we kind of establish those terms, and how does Open North then use its visibility and credibility to become an advocate, right? To talk about kind of the data politics, right? And how do we kind of release more data and enable, First Nations that are already very, very advanced in this. There are many, many different organizations that are active, not just in Canada, but in a transnational basis. So we're going to connect with these different leaders around Canada to facilitate that conversation and put our weight behind their initiative. Immigration and Citizenship Canada, obviously with the influx of Syrian refugees, but beyond that, there's a lot of newcomers that come to Canada. There's also a need from government to understand who those stakeholders, not stakeholders, but different organizations that are catering different services to newcomers in Canada, to understand, A, what are their data needs? So we've already done that research, right? But then also, what is their digital capacity? So this is again an opportunity for Open North to connect, different demands, right, that can then be conveyed to government so that if it's thinking about investing and supporting the newcomer and settlement community in Canada, what type of investments make more sense to them from their perspective. The Global Open Data Index, we were just hired to be the reviewers on the legislative component of that index. This is facilitated by the Open Knowledge International. And so we've recruited, I know Samara was here last week, I think. And so we're working with Samara to build a team of volunteers to help us review all the submissions on legislative data. So again, always we're small organizations, we're always kind of leveraging different networks and opportunities to collaborate. And Statistics Canada, they have a cool mapping project that no other government departments are doing in Canada, using OpenStreetMap to kind of fill in some of the gaps on OpenStreetMap. It's a pilot project. It's creating an interesting conversation, let's put it this way, within Statistics Canada, and other departments are also seeing, okay, how can we innovate? How can we use different tools and methodologies to not only engage, but develop platforms that can be useful for policymakers and I know time flies very quickly when we do these presentations. I've been asked to talk about the OGP and why I think it's relevant and how you can engage with it. So I've used Wired Magazine's Wired, Tired, and Expired, right? And just a few things, and I'm connecting the OGP with the International Open Data Conference, which also took place in the fall. Because I think there's an overlap there. Obviously, if you talk about the OGP, we're talking more broadly than open data, but there's a big stream within the OGP that's very focused on open data, access to information, and whatnot. So key things that came out of these past big meetings internationally, so the recognition of the impact of massive leaks on the world, right? I thought it was a very kind of sobering type of conversation that was happening in these events. Really looking past kind of open washing, open wishing, right? So kind of like pulling the veil, kind of, and just really looking at kind of these hard issues, talking about more like human rights, recognizing, different stakeholders like First Nations that have a much bigger role to play, more broadly. Also looking at kind of the receding kind of democratic space that's taking place around the world, like the big trends that we're seeing in Europe, in North America, right, but also elsewhere in the world. And what does that mean for transparency and like accountability and civic engagement kind of activists, right? What is that? There's a shifting kind of landscape that's shaping up in around the world. So what does that mean? How do we collaborate more, right? So there's a lot of conversation going on about that. So expired. So the novelty of open government and open data, it's not new anymore, and that's kind of nice. Right? Because then you can really kind of focus on, okay, what's the feasibility? When we talk about kind of, what it entails, it's not just a good political idea, but we're talking about some serious kind of systemic changes, right? That we want to make to our political institutions, the way we administer data, collect data, empowering different communities to kind of participate, in decision making. So that was nice. And then also, dropping the if we built it, they will come, because often they don't, right? And so for anybody who's developed, obviously a lot of people in this room that have been very involved in different civic tech projects, but some of the work that we did around open data portals, that's the biggest challenge, right? And that's a classic problem. If you build infrastructure, if you don't have a kind of a sustainable kind of engagement kind of strategy, then nobody shows up, and then everybody starts questioning, well, should we have made this investment? And so that's a big challenge for the many different municipalities and cities in Canada now that have open data portals or open data policies. There's about 75 or 80 that do now. How much time do I have? A couple minutes? 2 minutes? Okay. All right. So some key things that are coming up as part of the OGP action plans in 2016. This is coming from a recent report. Just some key issues that I wanted to highlight that could strike your interest, right? So climate change, obviously, we're all very concerned about that. And now we're looking at more what's being called kind of open data packs, a specific issue area, but then from a kind of a full spectrum type of methodology. So looking at prioritizing data sets, looking at interoperability between different levels of jurisdiction to tackle specific issues, right? And so climate change has kind of led to an initiative on an open data package for climate change. Open contracting. I'm not sure where Toronto kind of stands on open contracting in terms of the international standard. But again, looking at interoperability across cities, across government, quite important. Beneficial ownership. There's a campaign ongoing right now by Publish What You Pay Canada to shed more light, right, on disclosing the actual owners and beneficiaries of companies in Canada. So again, I think we're kind of getting past these kind of nice notions about kind of, okay, open data being kind of the new gold and things like that kind of rhetoric. We're really looking at like hard issues and how open data can really kind of play a meaningful part of any solution that we think of. I've already mentioned a few things about the OGP and why I think it matters. The big challenge I think in Canada, it's the federal government that took the leadership role because it's a national, when it was founded, it was meant to be different national governments that would, every 2 years, in consultation with civil society, develop these national action plans, right? And Ontario finished its process, now it has an action plan, and so that's ongoing right now. But who knows about the OGP in Ontario? And who knows about the OGP in Canada? Not a lot of people do. Right? But it's quite relevant because that creates these commitments that these governments now need to undertake. So we need to inform ourselves to be able to kind of read the plan and then see how we can engage with those plans, right? Because but if you talk to people and you say, do you care about open data? Yeah, open data. It's a nice thing, right? I like apple pie too. That's nice. But if you talk about a different kind of specific issue and the value added of open data, that's where you're able to connect with people. So as a community, from the civic tech community, from the open data community, we have a big challenge ahead of ourselves to kind of make the OGP relevant so that more people can use these mechanisms to make sure that government actually delivers on those commitments within the OGP. Questions? I had a few, but in my mind, I think we're really kind of seeing a shift towards more kind of data politics, but then also kind of connecting what's going on locally across the country. So, ask me questions about the OGP or anything that I just presented, or I'm also interested, obviously, to hear kind of your views and the projects that you're working on, and I'll stick around to be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Time for maybe 2 or 3 questions, and I see there's one right here. And then
So you talked at the beginning about how you sustain yourself, but I didn't really quite hear the answer. And I thought what you meant was, who is our constituency that will support us? And I wondered whether there is a constituency for for you guys, or whether you piggyback on other constituencies fundamentally.
Can you define what constituencies you have in mind? I mean, I can.
Well, like who's going to support you? Who are the people that care fundamentally about you guys? Or is it mostly that there are other people who care about issues, other issues that you can speak to?
Okay, so, I mean, I'm not a subject matter expert in all the energy data or First Nations, data, but our value added is to be able to facilitate a structured kind of process to talk about, how to think and work strategically with data. And that's very valuable for a wide range of different organizations, right? And so we're seeing that we're being solicited to do that. But I also mentioned that we're a social enterprise, right? And so our tool, Citizen Budget, enables us to cover our overhead, right? Which is probably one of the most difficult things to do as a nonprofit, right? Because you go from project to project, but then how do you pay your rent? How do you pay all these costs that you have that come up?
So those are governments that set those up.
So cities, okay, so 75 cities, but then also Manitoba has used Citizen Budget, and we're looking at ways of being able to scale this kind of internationally. We had a project in Ukraine, for example, where we deployed Citizen Budget with the city of Kiev, right? So that's kind of a nice way of being able to look at a different context and then deploy our solution and adapt it in collaboration with our organizations there. And we've also received some funding from the Philanthropic Center.
few other questions. So I saw Sharky and then Caitlin, and then so Sharky, you had a
Yeah,
question?
thanks for mentioning. So, even though you're not an expert in particular case, and you're creating more of a strategy, for some of the projects that you mentioned, it appears that you're going to focus, are you going to lay out that methodology and that process? Is that going to be open? And is that going to be available?
Sure.
Gain access to you?
Right. So how open is open, right? Sure. I mean, you know, all of our code for all the solutions that we work on is available on GitHub, right? But what you're talking about is in terms of, you know, when we talk about stakeholder engagement, right? And when I designed like a survey instrument to be able to identify the data needs of different stakeholders. So we've done a project with Immigration Canada last year, 2016, and in our report we included, you know, the report was published, right? And so a lot of that methodology was also. You know, sometimes I think it's good to be able to make ourselves available to have a conversation with somebody who's interested in learning more about our work. Not to kind of, you know, close off the accessibility of our methodology, but sometimes it's very context specific. Right? So not a methodology that I'm designing for a particular stakeholder group may not transfer exactly to another. So we have to be careful in the way that we do that.
Are you also, for example, in Aboriginals, are you not sure if you go out there with many different stakeholders, but do you also, are you restricted from engaging or providing information based on something that's restricted data, or do you challenge to go out?
I don't shy away about asking for, you know, data sets that aren't necessarily available. You know, that's part of advocacy role and also as a nonprofit with our mission. With respect to First Nations and Aboriginal communities, we just started now, you know, and so I think the reason why they brought us in is to also look at, you know, kind of the broader kind of concepts of open data sovereignty. Like I said, they're often moving along. So we need to look at issues of, you know, control, consent, licensing, traditional knowledge, you know, all these things that are super interesting, right? But then how do we translate that into a advocacy strategy, you know, with the government, right? And so, you know, I need to learn a lot about that, and I'm going to be, you know, listening actively. So, you know, that it's probably taken us about a year and a few months, you know, building relationships with, you know, so we're kind of at the end of the beginning, so to speak, and now we're going to actually.
And then just one last question. So,
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. Just on the point of engagement, and like what you were saying, people are like, yeah, open data is nice, it's like, who doesn't like open data? But if we think of like three categories, like front runners, people are super keen, I think that like most people in this room may fit into that category, and then people more sort of like on the fence, like in the middle, and then we think of people who are just like not interested, like foot draggers, like if we're looking at that middle category of people and we're thinking about how to make this more inclusive, how to make it more accessible, how to infuse this type of conversation into the city budget meetings that are going on right now, or the work that we're doing with Aboriginal communities, like what it would be like top like 1 to 3 tips from your perspective of how to start to have this conversation with people who may not already be having it.
Right. So I think, and I think your third category, I think there's probably people who don't know that they're interested in open data, but don't recognize that it's an open data, that they're actually using open data solutions, right? And so, you know, I think there's a segmentation of that third group that you're talking about. With the second group, I think, well, I think I think you need to create mechanisms to be more responsive, first of all. I think, you know, that's the shift that we're seeing in the relationship that, you know, government has with, you know, with citizens more broadly. So we need to develop those more responsive mechanisms, right? And to collect information, to be there. It's a new way of engagement, right? And to make it relevant to issues. I think, you know, that's really what grabs people, right? How is open data going to improve my life? You know, and there's probably a lot of different, and there are a lot of different ways that it can be applied in different types of solutions. So we need to make that, and we need to build a narrative to be able to communicate that effectively. At the same time as creating these like feedback loops that enable us to be more responsive. So the porosity of public institutions, I think is something that we're seeing more and more. And one thing that I would be, because this is, a lot of it has to do with trust, right? And building trust with people that feel that they're able to have not only their voices heard, but that when they express an interest in a particular issue, a particular data set, that something actually happens, right? So there's an expectation there. On the flip side, I think there's also a need in Canada and globally, we're not seeing this, to be able to understand better the risk considerations or perceptions of risk in releasing data publicly, right? We should be able to know more about what are these discussions that are taking place when data sets are being prioritized and deliberated kind of internally within public administrations. That, to me, is kind of a next phase of the way that we want to build kind of these trust kind of engagement processes. Or else we just end up with the end of that conversation and a list of data sets of like, ta-da, big announcement, great, okay, cool, data looks good, but then how can we be part of the early stages of the life cycle of how data is being curated within public administrations. So that's a new kind of paradigm, I think a new way that public administrations are working and innovating, and I think we're seeing a lot of good signs in that.
All right. So thank you very, very much for the presentation. You can now applaud. So now you're almost done hearing from me. So now's the time where we have an announcements, where this is a time where if you have something